Okay, let's just try to picture this for a moment. Imagine a vital global artery, right? Nearly a fifth of the world's oil, maybe a third of its LNG, flows through it. And then suddenly it just closes.
We're talking about the Strait of Hormuz, of course.
Exactly, an absolutely indispensable waterway, and right now it feels like it's perched right on the edge, geopolitically speaking. What would that closure actually mean for, economies, for daily life,
It's a
globally?
sobering thought.
So today in this deep dive, our mission is pretty clear. We want to unravel the really complex reasons why Iran might even consider choking this lifeline,
And look at the consequences. The security fallout, the geopolitical shifts.
and the absolutely catastrophic economic shockwave. It wouldn't just hit the region, it would go everywhere. Our goal here is for you, listening, to come away truly well informed about this potential crisis.
And everything we're discussing, it comes from a deep analysis of some comprehensive source material we've looked at, specifically focusing on the Strait of Hormuz document.
Right. So let's dive in. Where do we start? Just how important is this strait?
Well, the sources are unambiguous. It's described as one of the world's most crucial, strategic, vital gateways for oil transport. Simple as that.
Geographically, it's nestled between Oman and Iran, right? Connecting the Arabian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and then out into the Arabian Sea.
Exactly. And its physical characteristics, its depth, its width, they're almost perfectly suited for the largest oil tankers, the supertankers.
And its role in keeping global energy markets stable. I mean, it sounds like it's immense, a real linchpin.
Oh, absolutely. You mentioned the volume, maybe 20 to 25% of total global oil consumption. That's what, around 20 million barrels per day in 2024 numbers.
20 million barrels a day, that's just a staggering figure flowing through one narrow channel.
It is. And think about the countries exporting through there. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, UAE, Kuwait, Iran itself, Qatar.
Their economies basically depend on it, don't they?
Profoundly. The source material really emphasizes that. These Gulf states, their national budgets, their infrastructure projects, social welfare, it's all heavily funded by these energy exports moving through Hormuz. Any disruption hits them hard.
Okay, so that's the exporters. But what about the other side, the importers? The sources talk about a kind of cascading vulnerability, right?
Definitely. You look at major economies, especially the fast-growing ones in Asia, China, India, Japan, South Korea. They rely massively on consistent, affordable energy coming from the Middle East through Hormuz.
So they're just as exposed, maybe even more so in some ways.
You could argue that. The 2024 data is pretty stark. Something like 84% of the crude oil and condensate and 83% of the LNG going to the Strait ended up primarily in those Asian countries.
Wow.
And then there's Qatar, one of the world's biggest LNG exporters, and they rely almost entirely on the Strait. It just highlights how critical it is for, diverse energy supplies, not just oil.
And it's not just energy, is it? The sources mention it supports major ports, too, like Jebel Ali in the UAE, Khalifa Port in Abu Dhabi, these huge trade hubs.
Precisely. It's a vital corridor for broader international trade, too. Manufactured goods, raw materials, food supplies, lots flows through there besides energy tankers.
But the killer point, it seems, is the lack of real alternatives. The sources mention pipelines in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, but they just can't handle the volume.
Not even close. Their combined capacity falls way short of what the Strait handles daily. So, despite those pipelines, the Strait's strategic importance, it remains absolutely critical. There's no easy workaround.
Which brings us to the really big question. Why on earth would Iran, knowing all this, even think about closing it? It seems almost self-destructive.
Well, it is fraught with risk, no doubt, but the possibility isn't zero. It's driven by complex strategic thinking, political calculations, economic pressures, especially now with tensions spiking between Iran and Israel, and the U.S. potentially getting more directly involved.
So let's break down those potential triggers. The sources highlight retaliation as a major one, specifically if Iranian energy facilities get hit.
Right. Iran is incredibly reliant on its energy sector. Oil exports make up something like 85% of government revenue, and almost all their export terminals are in the Arabian Gulf, so they need the Strait open too.
And they even import gasoline through it because their refining capacity isn't enough.
That's right. So hitting their energy infrastructure, and the sources note recent Israeli strikes have targeted things like the South Pars gas field, refineries, oil depots that hits Iran where it really hurts.
So the motive for closure then would be, what, to spread the pain?
Kind of, to turn the conflict into a wider economic struggle.
Hmm.
Use the Strait as a weapon. It's direct retaliation, but also a powerful way to pressure other countries that rely on the Strait to back off or condemn actions against Iran.
A sort of coercive economic leverage. Makes sense in a grim way. What else could trigger it? The sources mentioned direct U.S. involvement.
Yes, that's a huge one. Iran keeps accusing the U.S. of being directly involved, claiming they have solid evidence of U.S. forces and bases helping Israel. They've made explicit threats against U.S. forces if they assist Israel.
And we've seen actions that could be interpreted that way, right? The U.S. shooting down Iranian drones, deploying more naval assets.
Exactly. Netanyahu even acknowledged U.S. help, and while U.S. officials talk about red lines, Iran vows retaliation. This whole situation increases the chance of miscalculation, an incident that spirals, prompting Iran to lash out by closing the strait, which could then drag the U.S. into a much bigger war.
Very dangerous escalation ladder. Then there's perhaps the most dramatic trial mentioned, the assassination of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei.
Yeah, the sources really stress his central role. He has near absolute authority, foreign policy, military command. He's seen as irreplaceable within their system.
And there are reports, intelligence apparently, that Israel has contingency plans for this. Officials have even hinted at it.
That's what the analysis suggests. And given past operations against Iranian commanders and scientists, Tehran would likely see Khamenei's assassination as an existential threat, not just another attack.
So no more strategic restraint in that scenario.
Probably not. They'd likely respond forcefully, immediately. A prolonged closure of the strait could be part of that maximum pressure on global energy, reasserting deterrence, maybe even accelerating their nuclear program. It changes the game entirely.
A truly drastic response to a drastic event. Okay. And the final motive explored is internal pressure. Domestic problems leading to external action.
Right. The Iranian regime faces serious internal challenges. Economic problems, public discontent, a sense of legitimacy crisis. The recent death of senior officials haven't helped, potentially exposing power struggles.
And the thinking is, create an external crisis to distract from internal ones. The classic rally around the flag effect.
It's a common pattern in geopolitics, yeah. A regime feeling fragile internally might externalize conflict. Closing a strait, despite the huge global impact, would instantly shift everyone's focus internationally and domestically to that external crisis. So, ironically, internal weakness could actually increase the odds of this kind of extreme external action if they feel regime survival is at stake.
Prioritizing survival above all else, even the economic blowback. Okay, so let's say one of these triggers is pulled. Iran moves to close the strait. What happens next? The implications. The sources paint a pretty bleak picture. Catastrophic seems like the right word.
It really does.
Yeah.
Let's start with the economy, the shock wave. It's described almost like a triple threat.
Okay, threat number one.
An immediate, severe global energy crisis. Think sudden cuts to supply, panic in the markets. Oil and gas prices would spike massively. Over $100 a barrel seems likely. Some analysts and the sources predict $120, maybe higher, depending how long it lasts.
And nations relying on that Gulf energy, US, Europe, Asia, they'd face actual shortages.
Severe shortages, disrupting industry, transport, just daily life.
Big time. Okay, that's huge. What's the second part of this economic triple threat?
The domino effect. Global inflation surges. Central banks face a nightmare scenario. Hike rates to fight inflation, but risk stagflation, stagnant economy, rising prices, or keep policy tight when growth is already slowing.
Which likely means recession.
Deep recessions in many economies, yes.
Yeah.
Millions of jobs lost. Financial markets, chaos, severe drops, huge losses on stock markets, especially in oil importing nations. Investor panic. Currencies of importing countries would weaken dramatically as their trade balances tank.
And regionally, for the Gulf countries themselves.
Devastation. Their income relies on those exports. So immediate, massive revenue decline. Budget deficits, currency devaluations, economic contraction, potential social and political instability, too.
And irony, the third part of the threat is the self-harm for Iran.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's profoundly ironic. The country doing the closing would also suffer immensely. Yeah. Their own oil and gas revenue halted. Their ability to import essentials food, refined fuel, severely restricted. It could destabilize their own regime even further.
He really is a catch-22, isn't it? A move that could cripple the world, but also cripple yourself.
A very high-stakes gamble. Hard to see anyone taking it lightly.
Okay, beyond the immediate energy and financial crisis, what about global shipping and trade? That gets choked off too, right?
Completely. Ships carrying all sorts of goods would have to reroute. We're talking thousands of extra nautical miles around the Arabian Peninsula, huge increases in fuel costs, massive delays, days, weeks longer for deliveries.
And freight rates would just skyrocket. Supply chains grind to a halt.
Absolutely. Higher operational costs for shipping companies, slowdowns in manufacturing globally because parts aren't arriving, scarcity of goods on shelves, and those big Gulf ports.
Yeah.
Jebel Ali, Khalifa, cut off, isolated, deepening the whole logistical nightmare.
Plus, insurance costs for any ships daring to go near the area would spike too, I imagine.
Dramatically higher premiums, yes, making it even more expensive and risky.
So, economically devastating. What about the geopolitical and security side? That sounds just as volatile.
It could blow regional stability apart, force countries to choose sides, maybe break alliances, potentially lead to a much larger conflict engulfing the whole region.
Are we seeing any signs of countries trying to prevent this? Diplomatic efforts?
Yes, the sources say Gulf countries are intensifying diplomacy. They see the economic abyss yawning and are desperate to de-escalate tensions. Turkey is mentioned as being in a tricky spot balancing its U.S. security ties with its economic reliance on the strait. They'd likely be cautious, coordinating with Washington.
And the major powers. The U.S. response seems predictable to some extent?
Well, the U.S. has the Fifth Fleet right there in Bahrain. Their mandate is clear: freedom of navigation. Any Iranian closure attempt would almost certainly trigger a strong U.S. military response to reopen the strait.
Though the sources also mention the Trump factor adding unpredictability.
Right. Depending on the U.S. administration, the nature of that response could vary, which adds another layer of complexity to Iran's calculations.
What about China and Russia?
China is Iran's biggest oil customer. They have a massive interest in keeping the strait open. They'd likely use their economic leverage carefully to push for openness. Russia, despite its ties with Iran, generally prefers regional stability for its own interests. They'd probably pressure Tehran to de-escalate too.
This feels like it bumps up against international law pretty hard.
It does. Under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, you can't just suspend transit passage rights like that. Now, Iran signed but hasn't ratified UNCLOS and has conflicting domestic laws.
But generally blocking the strait without a lawful reason.
It would be seen as an unlawful use of force, a violation of UNCLO, the UN Charter. It would likely trigger the right to self-defense for affected nations.
Militarily, it's the U.S. Navy versus what can Iran actually do in the strait itself?
The U.S. would obviously bring overwhelming force, naval, air power. We've already upped surveillance. But Iran has formidable asymmetric capabilities, perfect for that geography. Anti-ship missiles, sophisticated naval mines, fast attack boats, swarms of drones, submarines.
And mines are a particular worry.
Experts quoted in the sources warn they could deploy mines very quickly, within hours. And clearing modern mines is slow, dangerous work. It could make the strait unusable for a significant time, even if the initial closure attempt is defeated.
So Iran might not even need a full declared blockade.
That's a key point in the analysis. A full blockade is legally risky and invites massive retaliation. It's more likely to use what are called gray zone tactics.
Like what?
Increased harassment of shipping, maybe covert mining, nobody can pin on them definitively, declaring temporary maritime security zones, things that create uncertainty, risk, and deter commercial traffic without actually crossing the legal line into a full blockade, similar to what we've seen the Houthis do in the Red Sea.
Clever in a dangerous way. Create chaos without triggering an all-out war.
Exactly. It's about disruption and deterrence, below the threshold of major conflict.
So it really is this delicate balance, isn't it? The huge economic cost to Iran itself, the strong international legal case against closure, the certainty of a U.S. military response. Those are powerful deterrents.
They are. But balanced against those potential triggers, retaliation, U.S. involvement, assassination, domestic pressure, it remains a deeply concerning possibility. Global powers remain committed to freedom of navigation, but the risks are undeniable.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does this all really mean for you listening to this? We've seen the Strait of Hormuz isn't just some geographic bottleneck. It's an absolutely indispensable global economic gateway.
And its closure, if triggered by Iran's motives reacting to regional tensions, domestic pressures, it wouldn't just be a regional issue. It would unleash truly catastrophic economic shocks worldwide and fundamentally shift geopolitics and security.
The source material really hammers this home. Because everyone relies on this strait, any disruption demands an immediate, unified strategic response to lessen the, frankly, unparalleled consequences.
Which raises a really important question for you to think about.
What does a truly unified strategic response even look like in a crisis this complex? How do you balance military deterrence against the overwhelming economic and logistical fallout that would hit literally every nation?
Yeah, how can global players actually prepare for and navigate something of this scale? Beyond just reacting when the crisis hits, something to really mull over.